The morning sun pierced through the glass doors of Sterling Financial Services as David stepped inside, his hands slightly trembling with excitement. He'd ironed his navy blue suit 3 times the night before, practiced his handshake with his roommate, and arrived 15 minutes early. This was it, his first day as a summer intern at one of the city's biggest financial firms. The lobby buzzed with energy. People in expensive suits hurried past, talking on phones, clutching papers. David approached the reception desk, where a young woman with blonde hair looked up at him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm here for the internship program," David said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Name?" she asked, typing something on her computer. "David Johnson." Her fingers paused briefly on the keyboard. She glanced up at him again, then back at her screen. "Oh yes, you're part of the summer program. Please have a seat over there. Someone will be with you shortly." David sat down, crossing his ankles carefully to avoid scuffing his new shoes. He watched as other young people filtered into the building, some looking equally nervous, others practically bouncing with confidence. Most were white. Actually, he realized as he looked around more carefully, all of them were white. "Interns for Sterling Financial?" called a voice. A woman in her 40s appeared, wearing a sleek black dress that probably cost more than David's entire wardrobe. "I'm Jennifer, HR coordinator. Follow me, please." David stood with the group of about 12 other interns. They chatted quietly. As they walked, talking about their colleges, their majors, summer plans, David tried to join in, but his voice seemed to get lost in the mix. He noticed a few quick glances in his direction, eyes that lingered just a moment too long before looking away. Jennifer led them to a bright conference room with enormous windows overlooking the city. "Welcome to Sterling Financial," she began, her voice crisp and professional. "You're the best and brightest from top universities across the country. We expect great things from all of you." She handed out packets with their names on them. David flipped through his, reading about dress codes, work hours, and expectations. Everything seemed normal until Jennifer started assigning workstations. "Anderson, you'll be with our investments team on the 14th floor. Bradley, you're assigned to corporate finance, 12th floor E. Chen, you'll work with our international division." One by one, the other interns were called and given exciting-sounding assignments. David's heart raced with anticipation. He'd studied finance for 4 years, graduated summa cum laude, interned at 2 smaller firms. He was ready for this. "Johnson," Jennifer finally called, still looking at her notes rather than at him. "Yes," David responded eagerly. "You'll be in our operations department, mainly handling our daily mail distribution and some filing." The room went quiet for a moment. David blinked, sure he'd misheard. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?" "Mail distribution," Jennifer said, finally looking up at him. "It's important work. You'll get to see how every department functions from the ground level." David felt his cheeks burn. Mail distribution? He had a finance degree. He'd aced the same interview process as everyone else. He glanced around at the other interns, some looking uncomfortable, others avoiding eye contact completely. "I understand," David managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "Excellent. Your supervisor will show you to the mailroom after this orientation." "Any questions?" David shook his head. Questions swirled in his mind. Why was his assignment different? Was this normal? Did they make a mistake? But he couldn't form the words. As the orientation continued, David barely heard anything else. He watched the other interns take notes enthusiastically, saw them nodding along as Jennifer explained various company policies. They would be working on real client accounts, attending important meetings, shadowing senior analysts. When the meeting ended, everyone filtered out, chatting excitedly about their upcoming assignments. David lingered behind, still processing what had just happened. As he finally stood to leave, he caught 2 interns whispering near the door. "Did you see where they put him?" "Mailroom?" "Really?" They stopped talking abruptly when they noticed David approaching. One of them offered an awkward smile before they hurried away. By the second week, David had memorized the layout of every floor. He could tell you which elevator was fastest, where the good snacks were hidden in the break rooms, and exactly how many steps it took to deliver mail to each department. What he hadn't expected was how many times he'd have to explain why he was there. "Excuse me, A senior executive called one Tuesday morning as David placed mail on his desk. "Could you grab us some coffee? The machine down the hall makes the best brew." "Actually, I'm an intern," David replied politely. "I'm just delivering mail right now." The man looked surprised, almost as if David had just started speaking a foreign language. "Oh, right. Well, could you still—" David bit his tongue and nodded. He'd learned quickly that arguing never helped. As he poured coffee for 8 people, he thought about the other interns, probably sitting in on client calls right now, taking notes that actually mattered. Later that day, while restocking supplies in the copy room, David overheard his supervisor, Jennifer, on the phone. She was talking about the new intern program and how successful it was. "The kids are brilliant," she said, her voice carrying through the thin walls. "We've got them working on real projects already. It's exciting to see fresh talent diving right." And David paused, wondering if she remembered assigning him to sort newspapers for the break rooms that morning. Week 3 brought a new routine. David would arrive early, sort through packages, and then attend whatever meetings other interns were assigned to. At least that's what his intern handbook said he should do. But when he showed up to his first marketing meeting, the receptionist looked confused. "I don't see you on the list," she said, squinting at her computer screen. "I'm David Johnson, summer intern." She picked up the phone. "Jennifer, there's an intern here named David Johnson." "Oh, I see. Okay." She hung up and turned back to him. "Apparently you're needed back in the mailroom, something about an important delivery coming in." David walked back to his post, knowing full well that no deliveries were scheduled that day. He spent the next hour organizing rubber bands by color, a task that definitely wasn't in his job description. But the worst part wasn't the tasks. It was becoming invisible. He'd wear his name tag clearly, introduce himself to new people, and somehow still end up being mistaken for someone else. "Hey, could you empty this trash?" a woman asked one Wednesday afternoon, not bothering to look up from her laptop. "I'm not with maintenance," David said gently. "I'm David, one of the summer interns." She glanced up, her eyes widening slightly. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I just assumed—" She trailed off, her face reddening. Never mind. After she left, David stood alone in the break room, staring at his reflection in the coffee machine. When was the last time someone had apologized for assuming he was with cleaning staff instead of the analyst team? The breaking point almost came during a brainstorming session. David had been actually invited, to contribute ideas for a new client portfolio. He'd stayed up late the night before, researching trends, preparing graphs on his laptop. When his turn came, he stood up confidently. "I've noticed a pattern in the tech sector," he began, clicking to his first slide. "If we look at the data from the past 6 months—" "That's interesting," interrupted Mr. Peterson, the team lead, without looking at David's presentation. "But I think we should stick to more traditional approaches." "Thanks anyway." David's carefully prepared slides never made it to the second page. The meeting continued as if he hadn't spoken at all. Other interns presented similar ideas, some nearly identical to his, and received enthusiastic feedback. Later, while filing papers, David overheard 2 managers discussing the intern presentations. "That Williams kid has real potential," one said. "His tech analysis was spot on. Absolutely, we should fast-track him to the client-facing projects." David recognized his own research in their description. Williams had literally repeated his presentation word for word. By the 4th week, David had developed a system. He'd arrive early, complete his assigned tasks quickly, and then find quiet corners to work on his own projects. He'd learned that speaking up often meant being talked over, so he started documenting everything. Every time someone asked him to get coffee during a meeting he was supposed to attend, he'd note it in his phone. When his ideas were dismissed only to be praised coming from someone else's mouth, he'd screenshot the timestamps of his emails. When he was mistaken for staff rather than an intern, he'd log that too. His notebook filled with instances that seemed small individually but painted a troubling picture together. The other interns chatted freely with supervisors, got invited to lunches, received mentorship. David ate alone, worked alone, and watched opportunities pass him by. But something was building inside him. Maybe it was determination, maybe defiance. Either way, David wasn't ready to give up. The all-hands meeting was something David had never experienced before. Every employee, from interns to executives, packed into the main conference room. The air felt thick with importance, and whispers of a major client presentation filled the space. David found a seat in the back, trying to make himself invisible like usual. "Quiet down, everyone," boomed Mr. Richardson, the company president, from the front of the room. "We're here to discuss our quarterly report to the Henderson Group, our biggest client." David's stomach churned. He'd spent 3 days working on data analysis for that report, pulling information from multiple departments. It had been one of the few projects where he felt like he'd actually contributed something meaningful. "The good news," Mr. Richardson continued, "is that overall, our team did excellent work. Client response has been overwhelmingly positive." A wave of relief swept through the room. David felt his shoulders relax slightly. "However," the president's voice hardened, "there was one significant error that could have cost us this account." The room went silent. David could hear his own heartbeat. The financial projections on page 27 were completely wrong. Completely wrong. Mr. Richardson's eyes scanned the room. "Who prepared this section?" David watched as heads turned, looking around nervously. He knew exactly who had prepared that section. Thomas, one of the other interns. They'd worked together on different parts of the report, and David had even caught a few calculation errors in Thomas's draft, which he'd mentioned to him privately. "Well," Mr. Richardson's voice grew impatient, "I need someone to take responsibility." Thomas, sitting 3 rows ahead, slowly started to raise his hand. But then something strange happened. Mr. Richardson's eyes locked onto David. "Johnson," he called out. "You worked on this report, didn't you?" Every head in the room turned to look at David. His mouth went dry. "Yes, sir, but I—" "Stand up when addressing senior management." Jennifer, his supervisor, interrupted sharply. David stood, his legs feeling unsteady. "I did work on the report, sir, but not that particular section, so you're saying you don't know your own work?" Mr. Richardson's voice dripped with sarcasm. "The file history shows modifications from your username. I was reviewing and helping other interns, sir. I pointed out some errors to—" "Helping?" Mr. Richardson laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Perhaps you should focus on doing your own work correctly before offering help to others." David felt the blood rushing to his face. He glanced at Thomas, who was staring at his laptop screen, refusing to make eye contact. "This is exactly why we have internship programs," Mr. Richardson continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "To teach young professionals that mediocrity has consequences. When you put your name on something, you're responsible for all of it." "But sir," David tried again, his voice barely above a whisper, "if you check the actual file logs, are you arguing with me?" The question hung in the air like a threat. The room had become so quiet that David could hear the air conditioning humming. Dozens of eyes were on him, some apologetic, some uncomfortable, some almost gleeful at seeing someone else in trouble. "No, sir," David managed to say. "Good, because let me be clear about something." Mr. Richardson crossed his arms. "At Sterling Financial, we have standards, high standards. When we hire interns from top universities, we expect them to rise to our level. If you can't handle the pressure, if you can't take responsibility for basic calculations, then perhaps you need to work harder to prove you belong here." David's hands, still at his sides, curled into fists. His fingernails dug into his palms as he tried to maintain his composure. The injustice of the moment felt like it was suffocating him. "Do I make myself clear, Johnson?" "Yes, sir," David replied, his voice strained. "Sit down." David practically fell into his chair. The meeting continued, but he barely heard a word. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his ears. Around him, people whispered quietly, some casting sympathetic glances his way, others pretending nothing had happened. After what felt like hours, the meeting finally ended. As people filed out, Thomas walked past David's row. For a moment, their eyes met. Thomas opened his mouth as if to say something, then thought better of it and hurried away. David sat alone in the emptying room, his fists still clenched under the table. He'd been humiliated in front of the entire company for someone else's mistake. Not only had no one defended him, but his own supervisor had actively made the situation worse. Later, back at his desk in the mailroom, David stared at his computer screen. He pulled up his personal email and started typing a message to his grandfather. His fingers trembled slightly as he wrote, "I think I've learned enough." David was packing up his things for the day when someone knocked softly on the mailroom door. He looked up to see Lisa, one of the other interns, peering around the corner. She was clutching a coffee cup in both hands, looking nervous. "Hey," she said quietly. "Do you have a minute?" David glanced around the empty mailroom, wondering why she was there. Lisa worked in the marketing department. Their paths rarely crossed except during company-wide events. "Sure," he replied, straightening. Some papers on his desk. "What's up?" Lisa stepped inside, letting the door close behind her. She looked over her shoulder once, then pulled up a chair next to David's desk. "I wanted to talk to you about what happened in the meeting today," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That was really unfair. David felt his jaw tighten. "Thanks, but it's okay. It's handled." "No, it's not okay," Lisa said firmly. "Thomas should have spoken up. Everyone in that room knew he did that section of the report. I sit right next to him. I watched him struggle with those calculations all week." David looked at her, surprised by the intensity in her voice. "You noticed?" "Of course I noticed, and it's not just that incident." Lisa pulled out her phone, scrolling through what looked like endless notes. "I've been watching what happens around here for weeks now. How they treat you differently from the rest of us." "What do you mean?" David asked, though he had a feeling he knew exactly what she meant. "Last week when you presented that amazing analysis on market trends, Jenkins completely ignored you, then praised Brian for suggesting literally the same thing 10 minutes later." Lisa's words tumbled out faster now, like she'd been holding them in for too long. "And don't get me started on how many times people ask you to get coffee or assume you're not an intern." David sat back in his chair, processing this. "You've been documenting this?" "I have." Lisa showed him her phone screen. Dates, times, witnesses. I've even got screenshots of email threads where they discuss intern assignments. Somehow, you're the only one getting filing and mail duty, while the rest of us work on client projects. David stared at the evidence on her screen, feeling a mix of validation and discomfort. Someone had actually noticed. Someone had been paying attention. "Why?" he asked simply. Lisa put her phone down. "Because it's wrong. Because I know how hard you work. I see you here early every morning, and because—" She hesitated. "Because I used to think these things didn't happen anymore, that we were past all this. But I've been watching, and I can't pretend I don't see it." "So what do you want to do about it?" David asked, though his voice carried a hint of skepticism. "File a formal complaint," Lisa said immediately. "Together, with documentation. The company has policies about this kind of treatment. We could—" "No," David said softly but firmly. Lisa blinked, taken aback. "No? I appreciate what you're doing, really I do." David chose his words carefully. "But filing a complaint, it won't change anything. You know how these things work. They'll do an investigation, maybe give some sensitivity training. Nothing really changes. But we have evidence. Evidence that could make my life even harder here," David interrupted gently. "You'll be seen as the whistleblower who tried to help. I'll be seen as the troublemaker who complained. Guess which one of us will have a harder time getting a good reference?" Lisa's shoulders slumped. "So we just let them get away with it?" "I didn't say that." David smiled, but there was something different in his eyes now, something that hadn't been there that morning. "I just said I have other plans." "What kind of plans?" David looked at her for a long moment, then picked up a framed photo from his desk, one he kept face down most days. He turned it toward her. In the picture, a younger David stood next to an older man in an expensive suit, both smiling at a groundbreaking ceremony. "That's my grandfather," David said quietly. "Robert Williams, of Williams Industries." Lisa's eyes widened as recognition dawned. Williams Industries, the company that had recently acquired several major clients of Sterling Financial. The company whose account could make or break entire departments. "But why are you working in the mailroom if you're family?" "Because he wanted me to see how things really work." How people really behave when they think you're nobody important. David looked at the photo, then back at Lisa. Well, I've seen enough. Lisa sat in stunned silence for a moment. So what happens now? David stood up, gathering his things. Now some things are going to change around here, but not through HR complaints or training sessions. Can I still help somehow? Lisa asked, standing too. David paused at the door. You already have. More than you know. But Lisa, he turned back to her. Maybe keep this conversation between us for now. She nodded quickly. Of course. As they walked out together, Lisa couldn't help but notice how David's posture had changed. He wasn't slumping anymore, wasn't trying to make himself invisible. For the first time since she'd met him, David looked like he belonged exactly where he was. Thank you, he said softly as they reached the elevator, for seeing what others didn't want to see. Thank you for trusting me with this, Lisa replied. Then, after a moment, things are really going to change, aren't they? David pressed the button for the lobby. Everything. David sat on his apartment balcony, looking out at the city skyline. The air was cool, and the sounds of traffic below seemed distant as he held his phone, thumb hovering over a familiar contact. Finally, he pressed the call button. David? The voice that answered was deep, warm, with just a hint of gravel from decades of business meetings and cigar smoke. Everything all right, son? Hi, Grandpa, David replied, leaning back in his chair. I'm fine, well, mostly fine. Robert Williams had founded Williams Industries 40 years ago with little more than determination and a single trucking contract. Now at 72, he controlled a multinational company worth billions, with holdings in everything from logistics to technology to real estate. Mostly fine doesn't sound fine, Robert observed. How's Sterling Financial treating you? David let out a short, humorless laugh. Exactly as you expected, I think. There was a pause on the other end. David could imagine his grandfather in his home office, probably in his favorite leather chair, the one that creaked whenever he leaned back to think. Tell me, Robert said simply. So David did. He told him about the mailroom assignment while other interns worked on real projects, about being asked to serve coffee during meetings he was supposed to participate in, about being mistaken for cleaning staff, maintenance, anything but an analyst, about the meeting that morning, being blamed for someone else's mistake, humiliated, in front of the entire company. Robert listened without interrupting, the way he always had since David was a child telling him about playground bullies or difficult homework. And what did you do? Robert asked when David finished. I sat there and took it, David admitted, like I've been doing for 5 weeks. Was all his grandfather said. David knew that, It was the sound Robert made when he was processing, calculating, planning. During business meetings, that often meant someone was about to lose millions or make millions, depending on which side of the table they sat on. Do you remember why I insisted you do this internship without telling them who you are? Robert asked. To see how people really behave when they think you're nobody important, David recited. You said it would teach me about human nature, about power structures, about who people really are when they don't think they need to impress you. And what have you learned? David stood up, walking to the edge of the balcony. Below, the city, lights were starting to flicker on as daylight faded. I've learned that some people will judge you the moment you walk in the room. That unconscious bias isn't really unconscious at all. It's just socially acceptable. That a fancy degree means nothing if your face doesn't fit their expectations. What else? That I'm tired, Grandpa. Tired of pretending to be invisible. Tired of biting my tongue. Tired of watching mediocre people get opportunities while I file papers in a basement. Robert chuckled, a sound that rumbled through the phone. You know, your grandmother used to tell me I had too much anger. Said it would burn me up from the inside. What did you tell her? David asked. I told her that anger could be fuel if you used it right. The question was whether you'd let it destroy you or drive you forward. David felt something shift in his chest, like a weight settling into place. I'm done with the experiment, Grandpa. Are you? I've learned what you wanted. Me to learn. Maybe more than that. But I'm ready to move on. And what do you want to do about Sterling Financial? David thought about Jennifer's dismissive voice, Mr. Richardson's public humiliation, Thomas sitting quietly while David took the blame. He thought about Lisa's careful documentation, about all the small cruelties and large injustices he'd witnessed and experienced. "I want them to understand they made a mistake," David said slowly. "But not just with me, with how they treat anyone. They think doesn't matter." "Interesting," Robert mused. "And how do you plan to do that?" "By showing them exactly who they've been dismissing for 5 weeks. Robert was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried both pride and concern. "You know, once you do this, there's no going back to being invisible. Once they know who you are, everything changes." "I know," David said firmly. "I'm counting on it." "All right then," Robert said, and David could hear him shifting in his chair. "Let me make some calls. What time does Sterling have their morning?" "Executive meeting. 9 sharp every Friday. Then we'll need to move fast. I'll have my assistant coordinate with their president's office. Can you be ready by tomorrow morning?" David felt his heart rate quicken. "What kind of ready?" "Ready to stop being invisible, son. Ready to remind them that Williams Industries isn't just their biggest client. We own enough shares to have significant influence on their board of directors. Ready to teach them that respect isn't about position on an organizational chart. I'm ready," David said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "Good. One more thing, David." "Yes?" "Your grandmother would be proud of you. Standing up for yourself, but wanting to make things better for others too. That's how you change a system, not just by breaking it, but by building something better." After hanging up, David stood on his balcony for a long time, watching the city lights grow brighter as darkness fell. Tomorrow, everything would change. But for the first time in 5 weeks, that thought didn't scare him. David arrived at Sterling Financial at his usual time, 8:15 a.m., 15 minutes before anyone else. But as he stepped off the elevator on the main floor, something felt different. The reception area buzzed with unusual activity. Security guards stood near the elevators, and he spotted Linda, the president's secretary, pacing the lobby with her phone pressed to her ear. "Mr. Johnson," she called out, looking startled to see him. "You're early." "I always am," David replied, confused by her attention. Linda had never acknowledged him before. "Yes, well, could you please follow me? The executive team is waiting." "In Conference Room A." David's mind raced. Conference Room A was where the company held its most important meetings. Interns never went there unless they were delivering coffee or setting up equipment. "Is there a delivery I need to make?" he asked. Linda looked at him strangely. "Just please come with me." As they walked down the hallway, David noticed the offices were unusually quiet. No one bustled about with morning coffee. No keyboards clicked with emails being typed. It felt like the building was holding its breath. They reached Conference Room A and Linda paused before opening the door. "Remember to shake hands firmly," she whispered, which only added to David's confusion. The door opened and David's heart stopped. Every major executive sat around the massive oval table. Mr. Richardson, the president, occupied the head seat. The chief financial officer, the head of operations, even board members David had only seen in company newsletters, they were all there. And standing near the door, looking more nervous than David had ever seen her, was Jennifer. "Ah, there he is," Jennifer exclaimed, her voice higher than normal. "Gentlemen, may I present David Johnson, one of our most promising summer interns?" David stood frozen in the doorway. Promising intern? Jennifer had never said a kind word about him. "Please come in," Mr. Richardson said, his tone completely different from the day before. Gone was the harsh voice that had publicly humiliated him. "Take a seat." David sat down carefully, aware that every eye in the room was on him. His usual confidence wavered under the weight of their attention. "Mr. Johnson," the CFO began, "we understand you've been having quite the educational experience here at Sterling Financial." Yes, sir," David managed. Jennifer stepped forward, wringing her hands. "David has been absolutely wonderful in our operations department, really taken to the work with such dedication." David stared at her. 3 days ago, she'd criticized him for taking too long on a filing task because he'd double-checked for accuracy. "Actually," Mr. Richardson interrupted, leaning forward, "we need to address something important. We've recently learned that there may have been some misunderstandings about your role here." "My role?" David asked, genuinely confused. "Yes," the president continued, glancing at the others. "You see, we received a very interesting call yesterday. Afternoon, from Williams Industries." David felt his stomach drop. The room suddenly felt too warm. "Apparently," Mr. Richardson went on, "they wanted to ensure their heir was having a positive experience during his internship with us." The silence that followed was deafening. Every executive stared at David, waiting. Jennifer's face had gone pale. "Their heir?" David heard someone whisper. Mr. Richardson's voice became very careful. "Would you mind confirming your full name for us, please?" David looked around the room. These were the same people who had ignored him, dismissed him, treated him as invisible for 5 weeks. Now they waited on his every word. "David Robert Williams," he said quietly. The reaction was immediate. Jennifer's coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. The CFO's eyes widened as the implications hit him. The room erupted in whispered conversations. "Williams Industries," someone muttered. "Our biggest client." "Oh my God," another voice added. "The potential acquisition." Mr. Richardson raised his hand for silence. "Mr. Williams," he said, and David noticed the honorific that had appeared. "We had no idea you were related to Robert Williams." "You never asked," David replied simply. "But the mailroom, the filing—" Jennifer stammered. "Yes," David said, meeting her eyes. "The mailroom, the filing, the coffee service, being told to work harder to prove I'm worthy." His voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "I proved exactly what I needed to prove." The executives shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Another loosened his tie. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding," Mr. Richardson said quickly. "We pride ourselves on treating all employees equally." "Do you?" David interrupted, his voice still quiet but carrying clearly across the room. "Then why did my assignments differ from every other intern? Why was my work attributed to others? Why was I blamed yesterday for mistakes I didn't make?" The questions hung in the air. No one seemed to have answers. "Mr. Williams," the CFO tried, "if we had known who you were—" "But you didn't," David said, "and that's exactly the point." The silence in the conference room was suffocating. David could hear his own breathing, the soft hum of the air conditioning, and the rapid heartbeat pounding in his ears. Everyone stared at him, and for once he was exactly where he was meant to be, at the center of their attention. "Mr. Williams," Mr. Richardson finally spoke, his voice shaky. We owe you an enormous apology. Had we known—" "Had you known what?" David interrupted, his calmness surprising even himself. "Had you known that I'm someone important? That my family has business ties with Sterling Financial? That we're considering acquiring a significant stake in this company?" Mr. Richardson's face went ashen. The CFO gripped his pen so tightly his knuckles turned white. Jennifer looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folder he'd prepared that morning. "I don't need your apologies," he said, opening it. "What I need is accountability." He stood up, spreading documents across the table. May 15th, my first day. Assigned to the mailroom despite having identical qualifications to other interns. May 18th, asked to serve coffee during a marketing strategy meeting I was supposed to attend. May 22nd, my financial analysis ignored, then credited to another intern 20 minutes later. With each date, David placed another document on the table. Email screenshots, witnessed accounts, timestamps. The executives leaned forward, some with widening eyes, others looking increasingly uncomfortable. June 1st, mistaken for janitorial. Staffed by 3 different employees in one morning. June 8th, excluded from client lunch, told there wasn't enough space. June 15th, my project proposal dismissed without review, deemed not sophisticated enough. David's voice remained steady, professional, even as he recounted the weeks of humiliation. June 20th, publicly blamed for Thomas Chen's calculation, errors in the Henderson report, told I needed to work harder to prove myself worthy in front of the entire company. He looked directly at Mr. Richardson. "The meeting where you suggested I wasn't meeting Sterling Financial standards. Your standards apparently include assigning me filing work, while other interns create presentations, asking me to fix coffee machines, and assuming I'm maintenance staff based on my appearance. Jennifer finally found her voice. David, I never realized. You never realized what? David turned to her. That asking me to organize supplies while other interns attend client meetings wasn't fair. That dismissing my ideas only to praise them when suggested by others wasn't right. That 5 weeks of coffee runs and mailroom duty might not be the best use of a finance degree. The CFO cleared his throat. Mr. Williams, please understand that Sterling Financial has always prided itself on diversity and inclusion. Has it? David spread another set of documents across the table. Because according to this data, which I compiled during my filing, duties, I'm the only black intern in a program of 15. Last year's program had 0. The year before had 1 who left after 3 weeks. He continued, his voice gaining strength. Your executive team is 92% white. Your board of directors, 100%. Your middle management, 97%. These aren't accidents, they're patterns. Mr. Richardson attempted to speak again. We're committed to changing. Good, David cut him off, because as of this morning, Williams Industries has initiated a comprehensive review of Sterling Financial's practices. Every policy, every hiring decision, every internship assignment will be examined. The room buzzed with nervous energy. Someone whispered about stock prices. Another mentioned the pending acquisition deal worth nearly $200 million. Here's what happens next, David continued, pulling out one final document. Williams Industries will suspend all new business partnerships with Sterling Financial, effective immediately. Existing contracts will be honored, but under close scrutiny. A third-party audit will examine your HR practices, with results due in 30 days. He looked around the room, meeting each executive's eyes. I'll continue my internship here until Friday. During that time, I'll work alongside other interns on actual projects, attend real meetings, and contribute to meaningful work. You'll treat every intern, every employee, with the same respect you would show someone you know matters. David gathered his documents. After Friday, my grandfather will decide whether Sterling Financial aligns with Williams Industries' values. Your company's future depends largely on how you handle the next 4 days. He stood to leave, then paused. Oh, and Mr. Richardson, about that Henderson report. You owe Thomas Chen an apology. His work was actually quite good. And maybe invest in training that helps people differentiate between constructive correction and public humiliation. As David walked toward the door, Jennifer stepped forward. David, please, we can fix this, we can do better. He stopped, looking at her with something that might have been pity. You could have done better 5 weeks ago, Jennifer. You could have done better every single day since then. The question is whether you'll do better from now on. Linda opened the door for him, and as David walked out, he heard the explosion of voices behind him, shouting, arguing, panic. For the first time since he'd started at Sterling Financial, David smiled. His phone buzzed with a text from his grandfather. How did it go? David typed back, I think they're about to learn a very expensive lesson about respect. The change was immediate and dramatic. By Tuesday afternoon, barely 24 hours after David's revelation, Sterling Financial buzzed with new energy, the kind that comes when people realize their jobs are on the line. David arrived at his usual time Wednesday morning to find something surreal, a proper welcome committee. Linda from reception actually stood up to greet him, offering coffee that he hadn't been asked to make. People nodded politely as he passed, some even attempting small talk about his commute or the weather. But the real changes were harder to miss. Every TV screen in the lobby displayed a new company-wide message. Sterling Financial commits to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Below it scrolled specific policy changes, mandatory bias training for all managers, revised intern assignments based on skills rather than assumptions, and mandatory diversity targets for all departments. As David settled at his new desk, he'd been moved to the main analyst floor. Lisa appeared with a stack of folders. Good morning, she said, setting them down. These are the 3 client portfolios you'll be leading this week. Mr. Peterson specifically requested your tech sector analysis for the Morrison Group presentation tomorrow. David raised an eyebrow. Peterson? The same Peterson who ignored my tech presentation 3 weeks ago. Lisa's smile looked strained. Things are different now. Everyone's been in meetings since yesterday evening. Emergency policy updates, strategy sessions, consultant calls. Indeed, the office felt like a construction zone of rapid change. A team of expensive-looking consultants had taken over 2 conference rooms, interviewing employees and reviewing files. David could see them through the glass walls, taking furious notes as people spoke. Around noon, David's phone pinged with an email from Jennifer. His former supervisor, now apparently his subordinate, wanted to meet. He found her in a small meeting room, looking smaller somehow, less commanding than she had just days ago. "David," she began, then caught herself. "Mr. Williams, I wanted to personally apologize for—" "You already apologized in the conference room," David said gently but firmly. "I know, but I've been thinking about everything, really thinking." Jennifer looked at her hands. "I need to understand why I made those decisions. Why I assumed certain things, why I didn't see—" She pulled out a notebook filled with handwritten notes. "I've started this bias journal that the consultant suggested, writing down every assumption I make, every time I judge someone before. Knowing them. It's eye-opening." David studied her face. "What happens to you now? Lateral move to the accounting department. 6 months of intensive training. I also have to attend sensitivity workshops and work with a mentor." She met his eyes. "It's not punishment exactly, more like rehabilitation, I guess." "Good," David said simply. Jennifer looked surprised. "Really? Really? The goal isn't to destroy careers over mistakes. It's to prevent those mistakes from happening again." As the week progressed, more changes became visible. The cafeteria posted new hiring practices that prioritized diverse vendors. HR scheduled listening sessions for employees to share similar experiences. The intern program was being completely redesigned, with blind resume reviews and skills-based assignments replacing the old system. Thursday brought a series of private meetings. One by one, executives who'd been in that fateful conference room requested time with David. Their approaches varied, but the theme remained consistent: apology mixed with damage control. The CFO offered David first choice of full-time positions after graduation. The marketing director practically begged him to consider their accelerated management program. Even Mr. Richardson extended a lunch invitation to discuss the future relationship between our companies. But the most interesting meeting came from Thomas, the intern whose mistake had started everything. "I've been carrying this around for days," Thomas said, closing the door behind him. He looked exhausted. "I should have spoken up in that meeting. I should have said something." "Why didn't you?" David asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. "Honestly, I was scared. Scared of looking incompetent, scared of making waves. But mostly," Thomas slumped in his chair, "I was relieved it wasn't me getting yelled at. And that's the part I can't live with." David nodded slowly. "Being scared doesn't make you a bad person, Thomas, but what you do after the fear, that's what defines you." "I want to do better," Thomas said. "For what it's worth, I talked to the consultants yesterday, told them everything I've seen, everything I knew but didn't speak up about. Not just about you, about all of it. By Friday morning, the entire company gathered for an all-hands meeting. Mr. Richardson stood before a room that felt completely different from 5 days earlier. As many of you know, we've learned some difficult truths this week about how Sterling Financial operates," he began. "These discoveries prompted an immediate and comprehensive review of our practices. Today, I'm announcing permanent changes to ensure this never happens again." He outlined the new policies: anonymous reporting systems, diverse hiring panels, regular equity audits, and a complete restructuring of performance evaluations to identify and eliminate bias. "These aren't temporary measures," Mr. Richardson continued. "They're permanent parts of our culture moving forward. And to demonstrate our commitment, we're establishing the Williams Fellowship Program, a scholarship and mentorship initiative specifically designed to support underrepresented students in finance." After the meeting, David found himself alone, in the elevator with Mr. Richardson. "Mr. Williams," the president said carefully, "I hope you know we're serious about these changes." "I do," David replied, "and I hope you know they're necessary regardless of who's watching." Mr. Richardson nodded. About the Williams Industries review. When might we expect? The audit results come in Monday, David said. My grandfather will make his decision then. And you, will you be joining the family business? David smiled. Actually, I think I'm going to finish my internship here. The full 8 weeks. After all, I never got to do the real program the first time. Mr. Richardson looked surprised, then relieved. We'd be honored to have you. As the elevator opened and David stepped out, he couldn't help but notice the difference in the atmosphere. The whispered conversations, the rushed meetings, the panicked energy, all replaced by something that felt more like genuine reflection and purposeful change. His phone buzzed with a message from Lisa. Thank you for standing up. Things feel different already, David smiled, typing back. Things were always different. Some people just needed to open their eyes. The December snow fell softly outside Williams Industries headquarters as David sat in his grandfather's office, now officially part of the executive training program. 6 months had passed since his Sterling financial internship ended, and the city looked different through these windows. Or maybe he was the one who had changed. The latest report from Sterling came in this morning, Robert said, sliding a folder across his vast mahogany desk. Their third-quarter diversity numbers look promising. David opened the folder, scanning the metrics. Sterling Financial now had 32% minority representation in their internship program, up from 8%. Their management diversity had increased by 18%. Exit interview data showed a marked improvement in workplace satisfaction across the board. Lisa's been promoted to team lead, David noted, recognizing her name in the report. That's good to see. And Jennifer, Robert asked, leaning back in his chair, still working in accounting, according to this, but she's been teaching those bias workshops they started. Apparently, she's become their most requested trainer. David closed the folder. People change when they're given the chance. Robert nodded thoughtfully. What about you? Any regrets about how you handled things? David got up and walked to the window, looking down at the busy street below. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened to the next black intern if I hadn't said anything, or the one after that. But you did say something, because I could afford to. David turned back to face his grandfather. That's the part that keeps me up at night, Grandpa. I had a safety net. I had power to fall back on. Most people dealing with that kind of treatment, they just have to endure it. Robert studied his grandson carefully. Is that why you've been pushing so hard for the mentorship program at Williams Industries? David smiled. Partially, but also because I learned something important during those 8 weeks. The system only changes when the people with power decide to use it differently, and sometimes it takes someone from the inside exposing the problems. His phone buzzed with a text. It was Thomas. Just got my full-time offer at Sterling. Wanted to thank you again for everything. Fair processes work. David showed the message to his grandfather. See? When companies actually change their practices, instead of just their PR statements, everyone benefits. Speaking of changes, Robert said, the board wants to expand our diversity consulting division. They want you to head it up next year. Really? David asked, surprised. Really? Turns out your Sterling experience isn't just a story anymore. It's become a case study. Other companies are asking us how to audit their practices, how to identify blind spots in their systems. David sat back down, processing this. You planned this from the beginning, didn't you? You knew something like this would happen. Robert chuckled. I suspected you'd learn important lessons, but even I didn't anticipate how quickly Sterling would mobilize to change when their business depended on it, or how many other companies would reach out asking for help. Money talks louder than morality, David said somewhat bitterly. Sometimes. But you used both to create lasting change. That's sophisticated thinking. Robert leaned forward. The question now is, what do you do with what you've learned? David thought about Lisa documenting injustices, about Thomas learning to speak up, about Jennifer confronting her own biases. We scale it. We make it standard practice, not just at Williams Industries or Sterling Financial, but everywhere we have influence. Ambitious, Robert noted approvingly. Necessary, David corrected. His phone rang. It was a conference call with potential partners, companies wanting to implement similar internal auditing processes. As David prepared for the call, Robert stopped him. "David? Yes? Your grandmother would have been proud. Not just because you stood up for yourself, but because you turned it into something bigger, something that helps people who might never have your advantages." David nodded, feeling the weight and privilege of that truth. That's the point, isn't it? Using whatever power you have to level the playing field for others. As he dialed into the conference call, David glanced back at the sterling financial report. The numbers told one story: improved metrics, better policies, more inclusive practices. But behind those numbers were real people living different lives because someone had been willing to speak truth to power. His first months at Williams Industries had taught him about corporate strategy, market analysis, and long-term planning. But Sterling Financial had taught him something more fundamental: how power works, who has it, and what happens when it's challenged thoughtfully. "David Williams here," he said, as the call connected. "Let's talk about how to build companies where everyone's worth is recognized from day one, not just when they reveal their last name." The snow continued falling outside, but inside the office, the work of changing systems was just beginning. And David had learned that sometimes the most important business lessons come not from textbooks or boardrooms, but from 8 weeks in a mailroom watching how the world really works. 6 months later, with that experience as his foundation, he was ready to help reshape it.